Okay, I want to thank Brendan for inviting me here. I want to give a little brief background. I've been with the NRCS 28 years, and I grew up on a small 7-acre vegetable farm south of Abiquiu, for those of you who know where that's in New Mexico. And so I've been a believer about this cropping systems of soil health all my lifetime. It was something that I was taught by my parents. We grew around 70 varieties of vegetables, and we sold at Santa Fe, Los Alamos, Taos, Espanola Farmers Market. And we sold at co-ops for many years on the piece of land that we no longer farm it for a lot of logistics, but we farmed it for 40 years. I'm going to show you some samples from my property, and then later on from Brendan's and what have you. So I want to cover some basic concepts on soil health and soil aggregation, and I want to make this main point that of all the things that you're doing in farming, you want to make sure that you have a soil that is as well aggregated as possible, because from that perspective is how you want to evaluate nutrition, pH, temperature, moisture, and all that. It has to be evaluated from the context whether your soil is healthy and is aggregated or not. So I'm going to do a couple of demonstrations here real quick. Some of them you've seen, and then we'll explain some of the science behind it. Before I start, I'm going to show this soil here is a clod that I took from my parents' garden, okay? So I want you to see that this is this soil here that I'm going to put in a clod. It's a loamy, a sandy loam, okay? This is this same soil cultivated, okay? And then this is a well-aggregated clay soil. And then while we'll put some different types so that you can see how the soils react, okay? And then if I can have, Kevin, can you come and help me go to the other side on this? So we're gonna let you see the reality of soils, okay? So the first thing that you should say is that why is a soil that has good cover, right? This is where I got that clod for this one. Why is it holding together this loamy sand, right? Why is it that as soon as I give it excessive, how much is left? Can we see that? So we can see that all soils, for a number of reasons, have a certain degree of aggregation. So you cannot always have an equal amount of aggregation. What you're going to find out here is that a well-aggregated clay soil is going to have the longest life in here. We have done this many times in the last 10 years and what have you. In some of our healthiest soils that were at 3-4% organic matter, that were on pastures or what have you, this thing will stay like that for a month. And you will find at the bottom that it will only break into very large aggregates at the bottom, right? So the water is clear. And in a little while we'll take this out and you'll see that the water has penetrated all the way through it. So remember, this is a clay soil and you're seeing its stability take place. And then you saw this one here, right? You saw that when it had good cover and good roots, it's able to survive the water penetrating in it. So this is the slake test. And so you saw what happens when it breaks apart. Now we're going to see some different soil types taking place. This is a good clay soil. This is a loamy sandy loam soil here, both underlain by a coarse sand. And this is a silty soil underlain by a fine sand. Now we could have done this many, many ways, and the reason that I bring this up is that the majority of my background is Southwest, arid soils, irrigated, in drought, where we deal with salinity, and I want to point out to you how important it is that unless you have really healthy soil, it's very hard in the Southwest to manage water and salinity and to actually grow a good crop, because water is the main thing the main limiting thing that's going to be hurting you, and the way to fix it is that you got to have enough soil or carbon in the soil to fix it. So go ahead, Kevin, go ahead and put it in this one, and Dan, put one, and I'll hold it here for you. They're going to pour it in as fast as they can. Go pour as much as you can quickly. Okay, go ahead, Kevin, and put it on this one here. Okay, so what do you guys see? Want to hold it up like that, Kevin, in the meantime? Okay, so what happens when I have a very clay soil and it has good aggregation. If I have a clay soil, and we farm some soils that are 3-4 feet clay in New Mexico. We farm every soil type you can imagine, from pure coarse sand to pure clay to every soil type to every kind of stratified soil. So we have all kinds of issues when we're doing soil health on irrigated cropland, right? Okay, so what do you see immediately when you compare this one to the silt over fine sand? Do you think you would have thought that a clay soil will have a higher infiltration rate than a silt? Not initially, right? Because if clay has poor soil structure and it's collapsed, clay will have a lower infiltration rate. That makes sense, right? But do you see that if I manage a clay soil, and I want to emphasize for here in the arid Southwest, and this would apply anywhere in the world, is that in New Mexico, with all the farmers that I worked with, and I've worked with many folks in other places, the importance of having a living, breathing skin in the top 2-3 inches, it's either life or death as to how successful you will be with your soil. So you don't have to get all the soil aggregated into the deep profile because we have extreme conditions. We have long growing season, hot temperatures, right? We have soils that are very low in organic matter. Most of our conventionally fall cultivated fields, if they're sandy soils, they're about 0.5% to like 0.7%. That's where the sandy soils are at. Our other soil types, depending on how they manage it, they might be 1% or 1.2%. So what happens as soon as you do anything to increase your soil organic matter by a few tenths or even 1%, it has a major difference on how well it'll drink the water in, right? So everyone can see how important it is. We now see here that the clay soil essentially is at the same rate as a loamy sand, sandy loam, well aggregated soil over a coarse sand. They both are about the same, right? But what we don't want to see in this example, the soil here, is that if I'd had a rain event, if I'd had any kind of slope or what have you, I would have the water running off if it had slope, or I would have the water evaporating, right? So silty soils then, after this thing wets, what it's going to do, it's going to form a very dense crust when it's a cultivated soil. Now this silty soil is going to be prime set for wind erosion because silt is a very, very fine particle and it doesn't stick like clay. So if I did any kind of tillage and I have any kind of wind, this will give you as much wind erosion as you need, which nobody needs, right? But you see then that we can get a clay soil to work, we can get a loamy sand, sandy loam soil to work. And the other part that I want to point out is that, and I'm going to try this one in a little bit. This is from my backyard garden. This is a sandy type soil in range, extremely bad soil. This is soils that are just horrifying. But I actually grow fruit trees and some vegetables on this. And that is this same soil when it's amended and covered with wood chips and grown with plants. So we're getting a soil that is completely dead, something that has probably less than 0.2% organic matter, and is completely does not cooperate with nothing, right? As soon as I amended this soil just a couple of inches a few years back, and I put plants in there and I covered it throughout the year, and what have you, it now is able to grow a crop. So if I dig under my soil just a few inches, it is worthless, really poor soil sand for many feet. So what is the take-home message about managing soils, right? We don't want to forget that living, breathing soil in the top 3 inches that has roots and cover. That's the beginning of how your soil begins to function. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to do is cover here some concepts about soil and how much soil organic matter you can actually sequester or put in the soil in different forms. And when I'm talking about sequester, I'm referring to about carbon in all of its forms, whether it's in the roots, in the root exudates, in the soil biology, in the surface, all the different forms, in the soil humus and all that. Okay, so when you're in a very coarse, sandy soil, you cannot build the organic matter as high as you can in a clay soil. And I'm going to cover that based on particle size differences here in a minute. So I want everyone to use their imagination here. So what I did is that I'm pretending that this is a very coarse grain of sand, 2 millimeters in diameter, okay? And what I want to do is I want to compare how all the different 5 sizes of sand compare to this in terms of particle size or numbers. So keep that in mind. And what I'm about to do then is I'm going to talk about this large marbles. The very large one represents a very coarse sand, okay? The next one represents a coarse one. The next one represents a medium sand. So you see how I'm using the marbles that themselves are made out of silica, of sand? I'm using them to illustrate size. Okay, the next one would be fine sand. And then I couldn't find marbles any smaller, so I used BB. So we have very fine, fine, medium, coarse, and very coarse. Does everyone have that in their head? Okay. So then, if I had if I wanted to see how many would fit inside a 2 meter cube of a grain of sand for illustration purposes, then we're going to do a little test here. How many coarse sands would fit in here? 8. Okay, how many medium sands would fit in one of these? 64. Okay, how many of the fine? 512. Okay, how many of the very fine sand? 8,000. Okay, and now I'm going to show you something right here. This is a clay soil. This is a silty soil. This is a fine sand, and this is a coarse sand. Okay, so how many in a 2 millimeter on each side cube of this, how many silts would fit in there? 512,000. Okay? If I get clay, very small clay particles, how many could I fit in here? About 8 billion. Do you get that? My point is then that depending on the type of soil you have, a very coarse, loamy sand, a very fine, sandy loam, clay and all that, the type of soil particle you have is conferring a lot of different properties to your soil type. So if I'm doing all things equal, like Brendan showed here, in one field is a clay, is a loamy sand, sandy loam, and what have you, I gotta know what kind of soil particles I have, because it's going to tell me a lot when I read a soil test, a Haney test, and other properties. And it's very important to keep that in mind, how you're going to read that. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is slaking. This here represents a macro aggregate. This is made up of many small little micro aggregates. So this would be a micro aggregate. A micro aggregate is considered an aggregate that is 0.3 millimeters or smaller, okay? So this is a micro aggregate. So when you saw this one collapse, what you saw was that all the aggregates that were in here, they all separated into individual micro aggregates or smaller. So you see that this thing fell apart, it had no integrity. However, the clay one and this other one here that is this soil here, do you see that it didn't fall apart? Which means that the individual micro aggregates clump together because of all the biological glues produced by the bacteria, by the roots, the mycorrhiza and what have you, so they're stuck together. You see what it does? So that's what a healthy soil does for you. It is from this perspective that you want to evaluate your soil. If I evaluate my soil and I do not make that distinction on this kind of stability and infiltration, and let me get this dense, I have it right here. Okay. This here is a nice clod of cultivated clay soil. Does everyone think it has good properties? This is the same soil as this one, except cultivated. If I had gotten this soil and done an infiltration test, it would have not allowed no water through it, right? So here's the take-home message on any of your soil types. If I take a soil test from a soil that is in very poor health, and I fail, or one that is in very good health, and I take a standard university soil test for organic matter, for pH, salinity, for anything, including Haney test, PLFA test, or any other test, if I don't give it context on how I'm reading it, the standard test by itself will not tell you enough of the story on what your soil was up to. Because what we're going to learn here is that unless you have the biology and diversity, as Brendan Rockey clearly showed in his fields today, we all saw that, right? The cover crops, the grazing, the composting, the companion crops, we all saw what he's doing, right? He's doing that because he has begun a soil health journey. And so when I work with a producer, I want to know what is your soil type. Do you now see why I want to know soil type? Because when I look at a soil type, a tissue test, a water test, any other test, I want to find out, were you like this, or were you like this, or were you somewhere in between? So I'm going to have a context on how I'm going to evaluate my soil. So I'm going to go back now to this story right here. Assuming that this is a macro aggregate, A macroaggregate is made up of many microaggregates stuck together. Can you see that? Right? And you already saw that we don't want it to break up into little pieces because it provides a bad environment. So if I am comparing a 2 millimeter very coarse grain of sand, right? This is solid mass. Keep that in mind. And I compare it to a 3 millimeter diameter macroaggregate. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? The macroaggregate is bigger than the coarse sand, and it has very good infiltration properties, right? How do I know that a clay soil that's well aggregated works good? If it's well aggregated? Because when it rains or irrigates, it drinks the water, right? So then I know that the aggregation for me, regardless of the soil type, is very important. Does that make sense? Right? So you can say that we actually have clay soils that have a faster infiltration rate than sandy soils. Because a sandy soil is not able to have as big as pores as a macroaggregate. Okay? You see how these things don't go against your initial thoughts about soil type? So when a soil has a relative soil health level in it, every soil type anywhere in the world will have, that's a crop that's cultivated or what have you, is going to have some degree of aggregation. If the soil is really, really, really healthy and it's well maintained, it'll be like this clod, and like a month later it'll still be there and it's not going to want to fall apart. If a soil has a relatively good soil aggregation, but it's not that good, it'll be like this. Now, check this out, what I'm going to do here on this, look. So what's the difference between this soil and this one? They're the same soil type. Why did this one fall not as fast? Because remember I told you that when this aggregate is in very poor shape, it falls apart into pieces, right? It turned initially all the soil dark. But when it has a relatively good level of soil aggregation, then it breaks up into bigger aggregates. You follow me? You see that when I shake this, you see when I shake it like that? See, it's breaking up into big pieces. Okay, so then what I'm giving you is a calibration curve that everyone that's a farmer is going to have. You're going to have a degree of soil health and aggregation that is based on the way you farm. It's based on your soil type, on your crops, on your management history, and what have you. So you have a relative scale of soil health, or it's either very, very high, medium, or it's very low, but you can always improve soil health. So come here, Dan, and help me with this. We're going to now do another demonstration here. Look, go ahead and hold this. In this cup, hold this under it. And let's see, face over here. Where's the camera over there? Okay, so we're now going to do, we did the infiltration test, right? We did the slake test, and I explained to you soil particle sizes and what have you, right? Now we're going to do the soil aggregate stability test. Okay, this is a clod, and of course we've done this many, many times on all kinds of soil types. So my view when I work with our soil health, Dan Bladel and Kevin Brodem are the soil health folks for NRCS New Mexico. I have a cadre of folks that I work in Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, and of course with all the people that I work with at New Mexico State University and others. So this is my experience and my view from a person that believes in this soil health and what have you. Whenever I work with a person that's evaluating a soil, I am absolutely only interested in the facts as they are in the field. I don't want to assume nothing about a person's soil type till I do a number of simple assessments. So we have gotten clods, and I want you to see what happens when I spray water on this clod, okay? Take a look at this. Right there. You'll see here in a minute what's going to happen. I'll try not to spray my friend Dan Bladel here. Just give me a minute. What do you think is happening, folks, when water is hitting this aggregate that it does not have good biological glues? Why is it immediately falling apart? It's not holding together as soon as water is hitting it. This would be the same thing as irrigating or a rainstorm or what have you, right? Okay, let me just hold it there a little bit more until I make a hole through this here. So Dan, show him that it's eating up in the middle. Just tilt it over from the side on it. So if you look at that, the main thing is if I continue putting water, I'm going to eventually just dissolve it, right? I'm going to break the I'm going to break the aggregate here. What I did is I sprayed it, right? And it had no ability on the, I don't even know what I did with my little finger, but it had no ability to, it was, as I wet it and I hit that aggregate, all the micro aggregates were just falling off. You follow me on that, right? So I need to know that, whether it's clay, silty, loamy, coarse sand. I need to know all those facts because it's going to help me when I think about how I'm going to interpret all the results in the soil test. Okay? Now, Dan, go ahead and get this one here and come over here. Now we're going to get this soil here, that high infiltration rate, and now I'm going to wet it. So just put it there. So this is the aggregate stability test. And you'll get the gist of this real quick. Okay, folks, what are you seeing difference between a well-aggregated soil and one that ain't? What is the water more clear than the other one? Right? Am I wetting you there, Dan? And in a little while, we will check how wet this is. Okay, so are we convinced that it matters on your soil type? We're doing basic field soil health assessments and evaluation to get an idea of what your soil is up to. So Dan, do me a favor then while I move to another subject and just spray that till it wets through, and then we're going to crack it open in a little while. Okay, the next thing that we want to talk about is, let's talk about the Haney test, and my main goal is only to hit some of the highlights. Okay, you can actually do the Solvita test. You can buy them, and you can put a soil at field capacity there, put a paddle that it comes with. Okay? And what it does is, if you see that I got a carbonated drink here to represent the soil solution. Okay? So keep that in mind. Let me get some water to show you here. So what I basically am doing here, you can put it down if you want now, and we'll check it in a while. What I'm basically doing is I'm looking at my soil as if it's like a sponge. You see that? So I'm looking at how much water is held in there. So if I get a sponge, okay, you can see my sponge right here, right? If I say this is my soil that I showed you there, and I say that soil, when it's really healthy, is like a sponge, it holds a lot of water. So today it'll use water, tomorrow, right? And what have you, till it eventually starts getting drier, and the plant starts sensing stress. But the water that's in there is where all the soil microorganisms live. Does everyone have any doubt about that? Because my main point is that all of these assessments that we're doing is that you are wanting to find out what is all the biology that's in the soil up to. And if it doesn't have that nice, elegant soil structure to live in, the biology, you can't have the diversity of biology in your soil. It just can't. Okay? So I liken this to a couple of concepts. If this well-structured macro aggregate is in your soil, you and I will conclude it had good infiltration. It had excellent slake test. It doesn't slake. And then in a while, we're going to show that the aggregate stability, that it drinks in the water and doesn't collapse, right? So if it's under those ideal environments, we are going to find that our soil is well aerated. Can everyone see the actual fact that a soil that has good aggregation has good gas exchange, right? That means oxygen is coming into the soil, diffusing into the aggregate, and carbon dioxide is moving out, okay? So when we compare and contrast a good soil versus a poor soil, a good soil is always related to a soil that has good infiltration, good gas exchange. You go outside and you measure the temperature in a healthy aggregate. We have found around 20 degrees Fahrenheit lower than soils that are not covered. So you have ideal temperature. You have ideal microorganisms there that are living in there, breaking down organic matter and what have you. So how do we know how biologically active your soil is? And again, I'm using as simple as possible of demos. If each one of these things represents a different type of bacteria, beneficial bacteria or protozoa or nematodes, you can see that it's a living organism and it's full of fluid inside its cell, right? And these organisms are inside the soil solution. That's the water that I squeezed out of the sponge. And that's what I want to find out, is how well are the soil organisms doing inside the aggregates, right? They're in a water solution, and they need to be able to breathe, they need to be able to eat, move around, they need to have the right temperature, they need to have ideal conditions in order to cycle nutrients. So how do we know then how biologically active the microbes are when they're releasing? They release carbon dioxide, right? So if I got this Coke and I just put a balloon over it, and this is to illustrate what's coming out of the soil solution, and why did I get carbon dioxide in here? It is the byproduct of respiration, right? Okay, so this is a visual. This is to give you an idea that the soil is a living, breathing system, right? So that means oxygen is coming in here. The microbes in the soil solution, they're aquatic organisms. They're eating organic matter, making nutrients available, and then they're releasing carbon dioxide, right? So the Haney test is one way of measuring how biologically active your soil is. Does that make sense? Right? Okay, whenever we measure temperature, and this is a soil thermometer, and we insert it in a soil that's real healthy, about 1 inch or so, that's where we find the temperature being between 70 and 80 or 85 degrees Fahrenheit, versus a soil that has poor aggregation, it can be like 20 degrees higher. Okay? Does that make sense? The other thing that we find, this is a thermometer gun. When I hit it at the floor, right now it's 68 degrees in here, Fahrenheit. A while ago I went outside and it was 134, the surface. Okay? So when we use this as an instrument and we gather this basic soil stuff and I put it on the soil that has good soil cover and good soil health, it never gets that high. It might get to 90, 95, or 100 versus about at the surface versus almost 40 degrees higher, right? So now what I do then is I'll take out my phone and I'll say, give me the temperature for Center, Colorado. And today, let's say it's 83 or whatever. So today I'm saying it's July 18th. The temperature is 83 degrees. The surface of the sandy soil was 134. And in the soil that didn't have no cover, it might be 100 degrees or so. But if I go into the fields that have the potatoes, you see that the temperature is way lower on the surface and in the soil. So if the temperature is much lower, then I will have way less evaporation, right? And I'll have more soil, more water stored for the microbes to use. On top of that, I know that it has good gas exchange. And then the other part I know is that when I'm working on diversity, right? We saw the cover crops, the compost, the grazing, the companion crops, is that all of these roots then are releasing a combination of very diverse root exudates. This is the food source that the plant gives, and then it comes and it feeds all kinds of soil biology. So Dan, I'm going to need your help again. So we can avoid making a mess here. So I'm going to use honey, and I'll tell you where to put it on this soil here. So Dan's going to pour honey on this soil right here. Just put some on the top. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that... My goal here is to illustrate the plant has just released food to feed the microbes. Okay? That makes sense? So this food here is going to feed all kinds of species of bacteria and all kinds of other organisms. Those organisms then are going to make organic compounds that stick all of this soil together. You see that this soil, in this case, is literally sticking, it's clumping the clay and all that together. Without a living root and without root exudates and without diversity, you can't get the soil to aggregate as good as it can, right? Because without the roots feeding the soil, root exudates, and the biology aiding it, you can't make aggregates without plants and microorganisms. So you can put that down there. So your ability then to build soil aggregates, we talked about, is the most important part of a farming operation, because from there we're going to evaluate, like we said, every parameter in your soil. So this is a soil pH meter here, and so I want to just cover briefly here about soil pH, because many times I work with a lot of farmers, have for many years, that they will try to read a soil pH reading from a soil test and make all kinds of great decisions on it, like I'm going to change the soil pH, right? But let's talk a little bit about soil pH in the soil. And we're going to again compare a good soil that's well aggregated to one that's not. In a good soil, where you're looking at pH, you have an environment where the microbes have moisture. They have a lot of carbon dioxide dissolved in the soil. And whenever the plant is releasing root exudates and organic acids, or the microbes themselves make the organic acids, in an ideal environment, the microbes regulate the pH and the plant together to where they have the pH where they want it. So really, the best way of managing pH or any parameter is you want to have soil biology manage all your physical and chemical properties versus me trying to come into the system and say, I'm going to force the pH, change it by using a chemical. Okay. So you can see then that I got this from, to show them that whenever we're working with someone like brand new, okay, it's a person that has never done soil health before. If you go along a fence line or somewhere where it's not being cultivated, the reason we like to evaluate a lot of the soil health properties in the top 0 to 3 inches for the majority of the soils is that's where you can get a good idea about infiltration, aggregation, temperature, and all that. We want to find out how it's there, but this is proof that the biology is really in the soil. So it's that enormous diversity of soil biology that you have in the roots that makes all these things that you want to happen for your, at the end of the day, you want to grow a crop, right? You don't want to use as many inputs. You want to use water more efficiently. You want to manage salinity better. So at the end of the day, how you manage your soil in terms of a soil biology will determine how effective you will be in dealing with your issues here. So what are the main issues that, for example, that Brendan is following here? So we have diversity in plants, right? So we have at this time of the year when it's very important, it's covered. You already saw the roots of the potato plant and the cover crops, right? And then the other part, what Brendan focuses on, and those that are practicing soil health, is when you want to have minimum disturbance of biological, physical, and chemical. Now follow me on this. For me to have a minimal biological disturbance, I can't plant just one plant by itself. You already saw that, right? You saw that in rotation with cover crops, companion crops, and all that. So I have then diversity in terms of a biological disturbance. By putting all kinds of plants, I am avoiding a disturbance which would be like planting onions every year, or planting a monoculture, or having a fallow system. That means I don't have enough living roots in the plant during the growing season to regenerate the soil. Okay, the next one would be a physical disturbance. And the physical disturbance would be not cultivating no more than it takes, and Brendan brought that up on how he has made those adjustments, right? So you don't want to have a physical disturbance of cultivating the soil no more than it takes to accomplish an operation. That's a physical disturbance, or too much compaction from overgrazing and what have you. Okay, a chemical disturbance. A chemical disturbance is that once I move to a soil health premise, I want to be very careful on how I use fertilizers, pesticides, and what have you. Remember how Brendan brought up how when he was planting his cover crops, that when he planted the potatoes the following year, he saw an increase in his yield and his quality. So he saw that the previous cover crops were able to recycle nutrients and add more soil organic matter and make the next crop better able to use fertilizer. So it has allowed him to reduce his inputs in phosphorus and potassium, and to use his nitrogen, wisely when he makes a decision to apply some. But that doesn't mean he doesn't use any chemicals. He's just now using them in the context of the whole soil health picture. He's no longer saying, well, I'm just going to give it this many units, I'm going to do this and that and the other. And then the other part that he saw that he's increased his nutrient uptake efficiency and what have you, is that he showed from his water usage that he can literally have a water savings by using soil health principles, right? So you can see here when we're here in this high desert or only the Southwest, that the water is a premium, it's a premium commodity for us. We should value it, and we should do everything we can to manage that. Okay, so another thing that we find, okay, I'm gonna need your help then again. Just put some salts in there, and I'm gonna put some water in here. Just a little bit. Yeah, that's good. Now, put some water in here then. Okay, in our neck of the woods, we have some areas where we have to deal with salinity. It's a big issue. So the amount of salinity that we have in the soil that the biology is facing, all the living organisms in the roots, is a big issue to us. Some of our irrigation wells for example, that we work with, we might be applying anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000 pounds of soluble salts per acre per year. So we have a salinity component in the water that we now have to deal with. In some areas, maybe here, I don't know what the salinity in this area is at, but not everyone has to deal with that. So we have to, when we're doing soil health in annual crops, in the irrigated Southwest, we have to cover all those variables in the context of soil health. So what have we found? So you saw then that Dan put salts in here, and I'm not only referring to table salt, sodium chloride. I'm referring to calcium, magnesium, potassium, sulfates, and bicarbonates. So we have water that is going to go in through this soil, and it's going to concentrate to some degree in the soil that we have. And what we have found is that the healthier the soil, the way less the problems with salinity or sodium show up. And a lot of this are all the soil health reasons, right? In a healthy soil, you have hardly no evaporation, right? Because it drinks it in the soil, so you can't lose that fraction of the water. In a healthy soil where you have a plant, you take away the evaporation, most of it is transpiration. Follow me on that? In a healthy soil, the water, because you have a much larger biological community of organisms, and you have cooler temperatures, some of you have seen that chart that says that at 7 degrees Fahrenheit, 100% of the water is used for transpiration, right? And as the temperature gets hot, as I showed you with a handgun, as the soil gets hot and the soil collapses, at a hotter temperature, you use only a lot more of the water is lost as evaporation or you don't use a lot of it for growing a plant. The other part is that the plant is able to manage salinity at a much more efficient way in a soil that has good soil health. So when we're talking about salinity, water use, reduction in inputs, and savings in fuel and tractors and all that, it's a function of how well your soil is performing. So you can see right here, do you see how this is infiltrating here? Silt over fine sand. See, we can't afford to have a water ponded for that length of time. Because what we have here is that a soil needs to be breathing immediately. Because for every time that we measure, like for a Solvita test, and we're looking at carbon dioxide coming out of the soil, for it to be a true healthy environment, you have to have an equal amount of oxygen going into the soil to cause respiration from the microbes and the roots, right? Okay, this here immediately, when it's like this, in this collapsed environment, in anaerobic, this is the perfect environment for diseases. You can see that, right? In a collapsed environment, it's a perfect environment for diseases. So when we do other tests, such as PLFA, or you can take earth fort analysis where you get different ratios for your fungi, nematodes, protozoa, and what have you, what we find is that when you have a healthy soil, these are trends and patterns that we see repeatedly. When the soil is healthy, you find that it has a diverse soil food web. It's got a lot of saprophytic fungi, a lot of mycorrhiza, all kinds of actinomycetes. It has all kinds of organisms. And the reason that they're at a higher level in a healthy soil is that they actually have the ability to survive there because it has all the different pore sizes to accommodate that. So when we said a while ago for our sandy soil, why would this soil right here not have a high biological community? There's no organic matter, it's a collapsed soil, right? So what we find on soils that are highly compacted, you can see this here is one from the one I showed you a while ago of this clay soil. This soil would be highly bacterial dominated. Because when this soil has this high PSIs, over 300 and some PSIs, you ain't gonna find earthworms in there. You're not gonna find a mycorrhiza or any of the other organisms, right? So a healthy soil is always characterized by a very diverse soil food web. And that brings me to my point when I'm talking about the soil food web, is the invisible part of the soil, the one that you don't see unless you're professionally trained with a microscope and what have you. That enormous diversity of microorganisms that are in the soil, that's what's doing all the work that you want. And unless you build them the right house to live in and provide them with a constant food source, under ideal moisture and air exchange and temperature and what have you, unless you have that environment, they can't live there. So it's not like you can trick nature into it, right? You either have provided the environment for it or it's not going to happen on its own. So again, let's review then what happens. This macroaggregate, when it slakes and it falls into small microaggregates, when they finally settle at the bottom, like right here, right? If I pour the water out and I let that dry, why will that one be compact and with no porosity? Because as these things fell, they compact, and when it dries, you've lost all the giant macropores. So this represents a collapsed soil. Does it make sense? Okay, Dan, you're gonna need, where's my worker here? Come on, Dan. Okay. Okay, this is vinegar. So we always want to be careful when we're doing this kind of demonstrations. I don't use anything stronger than household cleaning vinegar. Okay, acetic acid, right? So in our area in the Southwest, a lot of our soils are aridosols, calcareous soils, which means that they have a certain amount of calcium carbonate dissolved, calcium carbonate as a fine particle in your soil. And in our soils, they make the pH go anywhere from 7.6 to 8.2. So it's a relative thing. Some of our soils in New Mexico can be as high as 20-40% by mass calcium carbonate. Okay? But even if you only have a little bit of free lime, less than 1%, it's going to be enough in the soil to react with the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide and what have you. It'll raise the pH. So what I wanted to point out here is that I got a couple of Tums. Give me a second. Okay, calcium carbonate, right? This is the very thing you're going to have in the soil out there. Okay, so Dan, just go ahead and just fill it up. Don't put your face on the front. Go ahead, tip it over, and put it in fast. Some more. Okay, that's good. So when I hear this is effervescing, and in a very short time, it's going to dissolve a couple of tablets of calcium carbonate and lime. Okay. What did I just do here for illustration purposes in a soil? I used an organic acid, vinegar, to dissolve calcium carbonates that exist in our soil types. Okay. What kind of organic acids are you going to find in a healthy soil? All types of organic acids that the plant or the microbes produce. So in an ideal environment, in an ideal soil health environment, you'll see that if I put a balloon on that, it'll collect all the carbon dioxide and it's going to dissolve. But I illustrate this to show that for our soil types, we can have a lot of calcium in the soil, calcium carbonate. And when we have a lot of calcium in the soil, this calcium is also very good at tying up phosphorus. So you can precipitate the mineral calcium phosphate. Okay, when I have the right environment of soil biology, I'm able to dissolve calcium phosphate and other minerals and many other things because I have the ideal pH in the soil. You see what I'm doing on that? Let's see if I can get my colleague Dan Bladel to stand up again. Okay, we're going to talk now about a concept of cation exchange capacity. So just hold this for a minute right there, Dan. And I forgot to bring this up here. There's a lot of things that, for those of you that might be a little bit new to the soil health science, the truth is that to defend soil from a scientific is one of the easiest things to do. There's all kinds of, today we are only touching the tip of the iceberg of all the ways that you can compare a healthy soil and a poor soil health, whether it's physics, chemistry, biology, and what have you. We're just covering the most basic stuff that a farmer would say, okay, this is the way it is. Okay, so this black stuff is a humus compound. This is the kind of stuff that would be in the soil. You couldn't see it, but this is the soil humus. Okay, as I increase the organic matter in my soil, I will increase the cation exchange capacity, the ability to retain nutrients in the soil. So hold on there, Dan. So remember, I can get any soil, even if it's a little bit of clay or a lot of clay. If I improve the organic matter, I can automatically improve the amount of cations that it can hold. So hold on right there. Okay, come here, Dan. So in the soil solution a while ago when I got the sponge and I squeezed it and I said, that's like you getting the soil and squeezing in the water coming out, right? And I said, that's your soil solution, right? In a soil that has a higher organic matter, the plant can come over here and it can get a magnesium. See, this is a positive charge ion and attracts to a negative, right? So the plant can then utilize a lot of nutrients that are on the cation exchange that not only came from the clay, but came from the soil humus, because it also has cation exchange. So you see that increasing your soil organic matter humus increases your nutrient ability to retain nutrients in the soil. Okay? Does anyone have any doubts on that, about this kind of stuff on cation exchange? It's related to the percent clay in your soil. As As I'm holding water, let's say this is a coarse grain of sand and this is a coarse grain of sand, but now you're visualizing that a small amount of clay is in between it. Just being able to have a structure means that I can hold a lot more water because of the way it aggregates. So you don't want to assume that I can't make my sandy soils perform or function properly. Okay, in the Mesilla Valley, we are actually, with one of several producers that I'm working with, we are actually able to grow pecans at full production on pure coarse sand by just amending it with compost, lightly disking it, growing a cover crop, and changing from flood irrigation to sprinkler and drip. And so how do we manage, why would a soil that is pure coarse sand, as soon as we amended it with compost and grew a cover crop and changed the temperature and moisture dynamics, why does it choose to grow a plant when it's still 6 feet of coarse sand? Do you see how important it is for a soil to have a living, breathing skin? Because a living, breathing skin regulates that oxygen enters in it. A living, breathing skin makes sure that it has a very porous environment, it has good gas exchange. As soon as you increase that living skin, you can begin to have the ability to begin building soil health. Okay. So I'm going to put this one here from my back garden here, and I want to show you another little subtle thing. Okay, so it's going to fall apart a little bit there. And this is going to be a trick one here as to why does the bad soil not collapse right away. Okay, that is from my back garden where I have fruit trees and some vegetables and what have you. Okay, that's from a sandy soil in horrifying condition that as soon as I amended it for a few inches and what have you, it immediately allows the ability to start growing a crop. So I'm going to put in this clod of water, and I want to tell me what you think is going on with it. Okay. Unlike the other one, why did this sandy soil with extremely low soil organic matter, why did it not fall apart? This brings us back to a water quality situation, issues that we have in, you probably have it all over Colorado and all that. Our water there in Rio Rancho has very high levels of calcium, bicarbonate. It's very hard water. So when this water falls in this soil, it's able to cement it. Remember, this is completely worthless soil. But you see that it didn't explode right away? So that's a water quality effect on what happened when it hit the soil. So sometimes I work with farmers that are using drip, micro sprinkler, or what have you on soils that have water quality that's very high in calcium bicarbonates. And when it's sprayed on a soil that does not have good cover and aggregation, it can cement the top of it. And this is just one of many issues that we deal with. Okay? So anyways, does anyone have any questions? Brendan, you want to come back? We can just maybe ask a few questions here. Brendan asked me if I would just focus on some of the foundational things that pertain to how you should look at soil health. My goal today was strictly here to answer these questions that when I work with farmers, and some I've worked with for many, many years that are already on the road to soil health on it, all the farmers that I work with now are fully aware that we are talking about aggregation, right? Slaking, stability. We're talking about soil type. We're talking about water quality, salinity, temperature, and all that. So at the time that I visit with them and they say, hey, Rudy, can we come and visit? Let's talk about the Haney test. Let's talk about the PLFA test. Let's talk about soil biology. They already know that in my mind, I am going to distinguish between soil types, the management, the climate, and all that. And I'm not going to look at a soil test, a standard university or lab test, and say, make all your decisions from us. But there's a reason why, right? Because I think we proven here that a soil test from a good soil and one that's collapsed can still show you the same cation exchange and what have you. This is a soil health journey. You start somewhere where you're at, and you're not going to make any progress unless you engage this whole thing about cover crops, minimum till, diversity, and all that. There is no recipe cookbook that's going to say do it exactly like this. And Brendan and I were talking yesterday is that after Brendan evaluates his system, he could not use that even in another adjacent field that he has of a different soil or management, neither could your neighbor. Because these things are such dynamic properties that are very specific to his operation. So you see that I would use the principles of soil health with anyone, anywhere in the world. My background primarily is for the arid Southwest, where we deal with drought, water, salinity. We deal with everything that can crash a system. But what we have is we have a number of producers now that have begun making the changes and are able to, under a very harsh environment, make those changes. And so I leave it at that, and unless anyone has any burning question or wants to come afterwards here and visit with myself, or Brendan, or anyone else here, but my main goal was just to try to keep this as basic as possible. And you can see that I use as many simple illustrations because I don't want people to get frustrated with a concept. I mentioned a while ago that we can actually take this at way higher levels, but it's not necessary because at the end, it's how well do you understand these concepts. Thanks, Brendan.